As I finished writing last week's episode, I was very surprised to discover that I was approaching author Ron Marz and penciler Jim Cheung's final issue of Scion. This particularly surprised me because I honestly didn't remember Marz and Cheung leaving the title at all, which does bode well for the next part of our final 4 issues. If I didn't realize that Marz had left, then that means it must feel like he never left, so the quality of the writing must not have changed much. That's good. But learning, or relearning, because I'm sure that I took notice of this change when the book was originally being published, I don't know how I forgot that Marz was leaving makes today's issue all that much more important. This isn't just another adventure set in the world of Avalon, another monthly issue of Scion the comic book. This is the end of an era. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 18.22 of Scion, A Journey's End. Knowing that this issue was going to be something special, author Marz suggested to penciler Jim Cheung that they do something unique for issue 39. A longtime fan of the newspaper comic strip Prince Valiant, Marz suggested that they format the issue to homage Valiant's presentation. Cheung agreed to the challenge, and Marz didn't even consider the fact that Jim Cheung grew up in England. He had never even seen a panel of Prince Valiant before agreeing to homage it. What this means in terms of our reading experience is a format change. Issue 39 is presented to us horizontally, so that you have to turn the comic onto its side with its spine turned away from you. Every set of 2 pages within acts as a new chapter, complete with logo, a chapter title, and accompanying illustration. So each chapter in this issue acts as one of the daily installments of Valiant, mimicking its release schedule. At the end of the second page is a small advertisement for the next installment, teasing the next story by giving us the next chapter title. Again, in the format of a comic book, this doesn't really make much sense, but in the format of a newspaper, this is kinda neat. This forces every 2 pages of our story to be a complete story unto itself, as it is a single 2-page installment, but it also needs to be a single part of a larger story, as the 22 pages in this comic book need to present as a comic book. Another format change in this issue is that it doesn't feature any word balloons at all. Like issue 26 before it, the issue starring Elijah and his journey to the Sanctuary Isle, this issue only features written prose, like excerpts from a novel. Overall, I think that this presentation is a fun change for the book, one that really allows the art team of Cheung, inker Mark Morales, and colorist Jason Keith to shine. If this was going to be their last issue together, then they are going to go out on a visual high note. We open in the Heron Realm, focused on the Heron Palace, overlooking the sea. This is a gorgeous overhead shot, giving us a bird's eye view of the surrounding landscape. Things have returned to mostly normal after the chaos of the recent days, meaning the wedding of King Braun and Princess Elena, the dissolution of that marriage, Court seizing the throne of the Ravens but promising to honor the peace that his brother sort of created, and behind the scenes, the Heron kids retrieving their father. However, as we know, King Dane is not quite himself. Working with Queen Mariella, Dane, Kai, and Elena have maintained the ruse that this amnesic man is still the Heron King so far. But the children do wonder if this version is up to the task of defending their kingdom, should Tigris actually invade. So, we open this issue with a quick catch-up of Heron recent events. This is kind of standard operating procedure for Ron Marz, and it all works well. It's presented quickly. This is honestly less than half of our 2 pages. It's really tight storytelling. Ethan, meanwhile, returns to the Sanctuary Isle on the back of a heron dragon. He's greeted by a crowd of lesser races, including his friends Skink and Exeter, as well as his significant other, Ashley. Before they can relax, though, Ethan calls a meeting, warning their people of Tigris' invasion, and how the Sanctuary Isle will likely be caught in the coming conflict. In the crowd scenes, I would like to note that we do see Elijah, the lead character from issue 26, and one of the War Apes that we met last issue. It's nice to see some familiar background faces again, as it helps make Avalon feel more lived in and more like a real world. After the announcement, Exeter pulls Ethan aside and warns him of a disturbing development. Once again, this is a pretty fast-paced recap, but we move on from it pretty quickly, so that's great. I am a little thrown that now is the moment when the Sanctuary Isle inhabitants are being told about Tigris. Like, Ashley has been present for all of the Tigris adventure, and she has been on the island since issue 36. Given that Ethan and his siblings searched for their father for at least 2 weeks, that is 2 weeks that Ashley didn't say anything to the people that she is responsible for. She didn't prepare any kind of defense or reaction plan or anything. That just seems like a waste of time to me, a huge waste of time. Ugh. So, anyway, according to Exeter, a group of settlers traveled south, intending to set up a new colony on the opposite side of the island. They haven't heard from them in a few days, though. He has kept this news a secret, preventing any kind of panic, but he fears the worst. Ethan and his crew gather up a few more allies, including a war ape, and they head out after their missing peeps. That night, the party camps out, giving Ethan and Skink a chance to catch up for the first time, in a while. I can't remember the last time these two actually sat down and had a conversation. Skink asks if Ethan misses his old life at all. And remember, Ethan used to complain all the time about how much he wished things could go back to normal. But Ethan says no. He will always be a Heron at heart, but this is home now. He wouldn't go back even if he could. Aww. The tender moment is cut short when Ethan and Skink are suddenly attacked. A beast resembling a saber-toothed tiger pounces at Ethan. The blow knocks him over, but Ethan isn't badly wounded. He summons his energy sword, battles the cat, and finally manages to stab it through the neck. As he stands over its body, panting, Ashley calls out for him. The reason that Ethan didn't take much damage in the beast's initial attack was because it hit Skink first. And it doesn't look good. The sun rises as the party discusses Skink's fate. He needs more medical attention than they can provide with their field provisions. But Skink insists that the mission must go on. So, they split the party, sending back a litter with the wounded Skink while the rest of them forge ahead. For a moment, the crew talks about whether or not a litter of these cats could be the reason for the missing people, like maybe they got eaten. But Exeter is sure that they would have found some sign of them if that had been the case. Scraps, bones, cloths, something would have been left over. So Ethan and his group push on, and as the sun sets, they spot an abandoned castle resting on a small rock island just off the shore. A ruin-beaten stone bridge reaches out to it, and even from a distance, we can see birds all over the place. The party reaches the castle as night has settled in. The castle appears to date back to the early days of the war between the Herons and the Ravens 200 years ago. Ethan lights up their path with a glowing hand as they head inside, passing stone statues and piles of rubble. Ethan discovers a small dead fire, proof that the settlers must have camped here recently. Heading into a nearby dark alcove, Exeter finds the settlers dead and heaped into piles. A bolt of green energy suddenly slams into his shoulder, knocking Exeter back. Ethan and Ashley look to their attacker, and he's an odd one. Their attacker is an old man wearing almost a full suit of armor. His face is exposed and lined with years, and he has a gray set of mustache and goatee. In his hands is some kind of weapon, maybe like a 3-barreled energy blaster. Yellowish green energy crackles from a port on the side, and he stares our heroes down. Not one to take an attack on one of their own lightly, Ethan and Ashley rush in to fight this dude. His gun turns out to be some kind of energy lance weapon, and he holds it horizontally and then opens fire. Ethan blocks the energy, deflecting it into the floor, and then he returns the attack, slashing an arc of energy through the air. It's a great attack, but all of these blasts of energy are too much for the old stone floor, and it shatters beneath everyone. Ashley manages to catch some of the stone surrounding her, and she does her best to hang on to it, dangling over this new pit, but she can't last forever. As she starts to fall, Ethan dives into the pit, and he manages to catch her, land on his feet, and absorb the impact. As the dust settles, Ethan and Ashley find themselves in some kind of hidden dome, its interior covered with strange technological devices. It's some kind of storage chamber for ancient weapons, an old cache hidden in the very place where peace had been established. The old Guardian had fallen as well, and Ethan moves to him next. The Guardian explains that he's been watching over this place for decades. His life has been extended by the same genetic manipulation that had created the lesser races, actually. Given how dangerous these weapons could be, he has killed everyone who dared approach. And then he dies. Blech. Our heroes survey the room, with both of them assuming that this is the product of Raven duplicity. But Ethan wipes dust away from a crest set into the wall, revealing the Heron seal. This hidden weapon cache was Heron in origin. The next day, Ethan and Ashley return to the sanctuary city on hover sleds discovered in the cache. Guards have been left to watch over the weapons for now, and everyone is relieved to see Skink up and about. He's still bandaged and he is using a cane, but his wounds have healed amazingly quickly. Ethan is so relieved to see his old friend. Remember, Skink says, though, I'm hardier than I look. And yeah, I just bet you are. This portion of this story ends here, with everyone standing on the shoreline looking to an uncertain future as storm clouds gather on the horizon. And this all works fine. There's not a lot of depth to this story, but you don't really need a lot of it either. It is nice to see Exeter in his new role as de facto head of state, I guess. It's nice to see Ethan and Skink hanging out again. It's been quite a while, and all of that stuff works. I also like the idea of this old man Guardian a lot. We don't really see Scion play with the implications of its genetic modification technology very much. I don't think we've seen it used on a human being at all throughout this run, so it is cool to see a little bit of it here. I would have liked to have seen more, or maybe spent more time with this old man character, but at this point, I'll take whatever I can get, and we only have 4 issues left after this, so we're not going to get a lot. We then bounce, ever so briefly, to the Ravenlands to check on King Court. He's sleeping less and less these days, consumed by the actions that he had to take in order to claim the throne. As we leave Court ruminating on his brother, we then cut to a new location, the small, scrappy island of Cranemere. Little more than a rock caught between crashing waves, a powerful storm has settled over the island for now. Lightning illuminates the imposing stone keep that's been built on the rock. The guards here have all had their tongues removed in order to keep the secrets of those who are imprisoned here. Among those prisoners is Braun. Both his hands are locked inside of thick metal gauntlets, which are in turn chained to the wall. He is dirty and unwashed, his face hidden by shadows. He sits, he waits, and he plots. And finally, we get a glimpse of the future. The final page in this issue shows an older Ethan sitting upon his throne. A scar runs down his left eye, and his long hair is worn in a ponytail. He's actually looking very Kai-esque in his old age. His son stands to his right, just taller than Ethan's knee, and next to him stands a very Yoda-looking Skink, bent with age. Exeter stands behind them both, and various examples of the lesser races surround the throne. To Ethan's left is a pregnant Ashley, and behind her is Nadia, clearly a welcomed guest, as she is armed with her silver trident once again. There is one final bit of writing on this page, quote, "These chapters are over, and though the tellers may change, there are tales yet to be told. These are mere hints of what may come to pass, as the story goes ever on." End quote. On the surface, at first blush, I have to admit, that issue 39 feels fairly unimpressive to me. Artistically, it is a treat. The turned comic 2-page spread thing is a neat gimmick, but I'll admit that the more enclosed nature of this story doesn't really allow the art team to shine. The double-page spreads and the prose writing worked really well back in issue 26 because that issue largely was focused on the beauty of Avalon. We had so many great wide landscape shots, whether that's of swamps or mountains or forests. That particular issue was just so pretty, and 39, unfortunately, just can't compare. This issue just doesn't feature nearly so many landscapes or nature shots, and it just lacks that kind of visual impact. But as a love letter to Prince Valiant and its format and its art styling, I do think that this issue works really well, and it is fun knowing that connection. From a writing perspective, this issue is really simple, and you would mistake that simplicity for nothing really happening. But Marz has definitely worked in a few plot points and some nice emotional touchstones. First off, we have Ethan's discussion with Skink. This is a super quick scene. It is only 2 panels, but this actually closes out a long-running background plot line for Ethan, namely, his desire to return to his old life. Ever since Ethan got the sigil, he has complained about how it threw his life into chaos and how even now he doesn't fully understand what it can do, or where it comes from, or what his future will hold because of it. This was a running conversation between Ethan and Skink for almost the entire first year of Scion. Hell, it was almost the only conversation between them. And at one point, Skink basically told Ethan to STFU about the sigil because he isn't going to get any answers. So he should focus on the here and now and what he can do with it, not where it came from. And while Ethan did STFU, we then saw him go on several quests related to his family. And I think that these were subconscious attempts to return to his old life. Almost immediately upon claiming the Sanctuary Isle and founding a new nation, Ethan ran off to the Heron Kingdom. On the surface, yes, his reasoning was to set things right with his family, but I think that maybe Ethan just wanted to go home, and for things to be normal, if only for a second. Then, when we saw him learn that Elena was going to marry Braun, Ethan ran off again, abandoning the Sanctuary Isle with an invasion imminent. After which he then spent several weeks riding about the Raven countryside hunting for his father. His reasoning for doing all of these things is completely valid, and it makes perfect sense for Ethan's character, but I also think that maybe he was searching for that old sense of home. Only after he has seen Elena endure one of the hardest things that she's ever had to do, only after having Kai admit to being unsure of taking the throne after his father, and only after losing his father does Ethan see that the Heron Nation doesn't need him, and he doesn't really have a place there anymore. Only then does he return to the Sanctuary Isle, and, as he tells Skink, this is his home now. It seems that Ethan is back, and that this time it is for good. That is a very subtle change in his character, but it is a powerful one for Ethan. I am a bit annoyed at Skink's particular role in this issue. Marz has been closing out a lot of his plots in the lead-up to leaving the book, but Skink's mysterious nature hasn't been addressed at all. It's still alluded to, sure. Skink gets injured and then heals quickly. I just heal fast. He says, "Ha ha ha, we get it, Skink. You're mysterious. But why are you mysterious? Tell me, you enigmatic little shrimp." Why even have Skink here if he's just going to duck out of our story? We had the same thing happen with the wedding, because Skink went along with Ethan there, and then he didn't do
No swearing.
He didn't even ride with Ethan and his siblings to find/save King Dane. He just disappeared from the plotline altogether. All you would have needed was a panel of him being like, "Queen Mariella, I'll make sure you get safely home." And then Ethan goes, "Skink, I'm trusting you with my mother." And he goes, "You got it, bro." And then everything would have been fine. But no! We just get Skink wandering around doing nothing, apparently. If this is Mastermind and main writer Ron Marz's final issue of Scion, then I would have loved to have seen Skink's nature or role explained or explored, or maybe at least be a little more solidly addressed. This is perhaps the biggest missed opportunity in this particular issue for me. Again, we're closing everything out. Let's do something with Skink, as opposed to just keep on going, well, Skink sure is mysterious, right? As I said earlier, I like the idea of the Guardian, and I appreciate the idea that the Herons were up to some shady dealings on the island back in the day. But this reveal is presented to us as a reveal, and we are told that both Ethan and Ashley are haunted by the legacy of their nations. They both assume Ashley's left them, but then they are confronted with the idea that Ethan's is the one that actually did it. But why do they consider this a bad thing? If this cache of weapons predates the peace, which was founded over 200 years ago, then those weapons were put there during wartime. Do they think that their nations did not stockpile weapons during the war? It feels like Marz is trying to say that the Heron Nation did some shady stuff in the same way that the Raven Nation used to do shady stuff. But we have seen so little of the two nations' history, or even their legacy, or honestly even evidence of the impact of their actions, that we really have nothing to compare this moment to. Is the modern Heron Nation better than the older Heron Nation because they don't stockpile weapons? What about the Ravens? Do they not develop weapons still? It feels like Marz is trying to make a moral judgment about these two nations' actions during wartime, but that is such a vague and ill-addressed subject within Scion that I kind of feel like it's ultimately pointless. The only other thing that really stands out about this idea is that there were weapons hidden on the island dedicated to peace, but that irony is also stupid. Because when the weapons were hidden, the nations weren't at peace. This is a war, Peacock. Sometimes to make an omelet, you need to break a few eggs. Any cook will tell you that. But look what happened to the cook! God, I love Clue. If you haven't seen the movie Clue, I suggest you watch it. It seems that Ron Marz wants us to assume that the Ravens are the worse of the two nations, that they are more bad guy-y, more warmongery than the good guy Herons, something that Scion has honestly been selling us its entire run. But that also completely ignores the context of war. Both sides were engaged in that war, and I'm sure that there were atrocities and mistakes made on both sides. Marz is trying to make the point that the Herons are just as culpable in war as the Ravens, and that assuming that they are the good guys is a mistake. I just don't think that he does a very good job of presenting that idea to us. Although, to be fair, assuming the nature of anyone is a mistake that we have seen several times throughout Scion's history. For example, Ethan meeting Ashley, Ethan meeting Exeter, Ethan meeting the War Apes in the mountains, and Ethan meeting Nadia and Tigris. No one is 100% whom they seem to be on the surface, and sometimes that's for the best, and sometimes that's for the worst. It depends on the individual, and honestly, that is one of Scion's strongest themes. As for why this castle and its cache is mysterious, I'm a little bit lost. The story wants us to believe that this castle is mysterious because we, meaning the audience, haven't had a chance to see it before. But this island has been inhabited by Ravens and Heron guards before. We literally saw them back in issue 24, I think it was, when Ethan and his crew first took the Sanctuary Isle. I find it kind of hard to believe that none of those people ever went for a walk or a camping trip in the wilds. Hell, Exeter ran around the island in issue 25 when he was searching for Ethan after he separated the fleets. Sure, maybe Exeter didn't go into the mysterious, foreboding castle, but he would have known that it existed. He would have seen it. He ran around the shoreline. Actually, how much more interesting of a story would this have been if we had opened with Ethan returning to the Isle and he gets told that Exeter escorted some settlers to a castle on the other side of the island that he discovered when he ran around the islet, and from which they would establish a new colony. But then we see Exeter stumbling back into town, and he's wounded and he's near death. So he's down for the count, and we know that whatever took him down has to be serious. That's got to be an Ethan-level threat, because we haven't seen anything other than Ethan take down Exeter before. That adds a nice sense of dread to our mystery, and more of an impact, because On the one hand, sure, I'm sympathetic for the various lesser races that have settled on the Sanctuary Isle, but I also don't know almost any of those characters, and I'm not invested in any of their stories. Exeter is a character almost as old as this entire comic book. I love Exeter, and I want him to survive, and if something can take him down, that's gotta be a thing. So then Ethan and Ashley would go to the castle, and the plot would play out, huzzah! But maybe we would just have the whole thing be a little bit more dramatic. Finding this cache of weapons also provides a solution to the looming invasion of Tigris. The Sanctuary Isle has been lacking a way to defend itself, and now it has found a way. Admittedly, from its delivery, it sounds like that way is filled with, nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, so we'll see how useful those could be if they were so terrible that even the Heron Nation didn't want to use them during their big war with the Ravens. But it is a solution. I guess we'll see if it gets used. The scene that we got with Court and Braun has some nice implications to it as the final scene featuring the Ravens. I've spoken before about how Court is less bad than Braun, but not as good as Ashley, so it is interesting to see that Court is haunted by betraying his brother. We could have Court be just as evil as Braun. He has taken the throne back by literally stabbing his brother in the back to do it. That's flooped up. But where Braun reveled in his deeds, Court is haunted by it. He did the right thing, sure, but it doesn't really feel like the right thing. And that is a very Scion thing to do. Where previously we would have seen Ethan struggling with such an act, we now see Court cast in that role, and that's an interesting exploration of his character. So what do you think Court told the Raven Nation about Braun? Because, Braun was killed back in issue 25, but we didn't have a body, and then Court was made king. Then Braun returned, and he got married in the wedding of the century, married to the daughter of the Raven Nation's most bitter enemy, the Heron Nation, and it was broadcast on TV. We saw it broadcast on TV. Everybody saw that was happening. And then, a few days later, King Braun is suddenly back to being dead again, but we still have no body to prove it. The marriage, I'm assuming, was dissolved. Court is returned to being the king, the new queen returned to her old homeland, and the no swearing Heron Prince destroyed a priceless church fighting some random woman. What do they think happened here? Anyways, we have Braun back to being alive, and I honestly don't even care anymore. I literally groaned out loud when I saw him because I'm just done with Braun. I covered how unimpressive of a physical threat that he was last episode, and a lot of that carries over to this issue. We have finished his plot line 3 times now. I'm over it. Plus, we still don't really know how Braun is alive. I'm assuming that he is still powered by my Shen energy. My Shenergy? Why didn't I think of that pun sooner? Anyways, we've seen Braun recover from being stabbed through the chest by a spear back in issue 22 when Elena did it, and Court's dagger was certainly no spear, so it's not really that shocking that he managed to survive. But if the Shenergy could keep Braun alive from that wound, then why can't Braun escape from this prison? Sure, we see that his hands are kept in some kind of, tube container thingy, but nothing in Scion's history would implicate an ability to control that level of energy. I suppose I would argue that Scion's general level of technology would indicate an ability to control energy, but that's also something we haven't really seen before, as most of the technology of Avalon, despite having a sci-fi design behind it, remains grounded in reality. Do those tube things siphon off Braun's energy? Do they just contain it? He has pants on in that scene, right? So how does he go to the bathroom with his hands being locked up? Does he just pee and poop himself? Or do you think that a guard has to lower his pants and then pull them back up for him each time? Maybe that's why their tongues are cut out. So clearly, I think that whole stuff with Braun is dumb. Then we end on our glimpse of the future. And for the most part, there isn't anything here that's too surprising. It is nice to see that Ethan and Ashley have a fruitful marriage and are still together, even after a kid and a half. Super glad to see Exeter and Skink still alive as well. I almost think that Exeter is missing his left arm, but it could just be tucked behind Ethan's throne. It is very hard to tell in the image we're presented. The strangest thing here is the presence of Nadia. Obviously, this is strange because we have war with Tigris looming in the background right now, and even Marz's final scene with our heroes hints at that, looking towards an upcoming threat, meaning Tigris. Is this implying that Ethan and Ashley will forge some kind of peace with Tigris after this initial conflict? Or do they just smooth things over with Nadia herself? Maybe Nadia betrays Tigris in favor of her friends. I certainly wouldn't think so, because, Marz wrote her as pretty gleefully threatening when our heroes were imprisoned in Tigris, but hey, who knows? This moment is clearly a number of years away, so they have time. Not that we do. We are officially at the final 4 issues of Scion's run after this one, but before I move forward, I actually want to look back at our last few issues. Reading this issue and discovering that Marz was moving on from the book really recontextualizes the past few issues, and it might help alleviate some of my complaints and criticisms of those issues. I would say that Year 3 officially started with issue 26, and that it ends with issue 39, which is technically a 13-issue year, but remember, cross-gen story arcs were written to trade, and those trades collected 7 issues, so a 13-issue year isn't really all that strange. But anyways, issue 25 is really the end of Year 2. The back half of that year had been all about Ethan and Ashley finding a new home for the Underground, a plotline that finally ends with them taking the Sanctuary Isle. Bronn's plotline during those issues was about turning the war around and striking at the Herons, something that he was in the middle of doing when his fleet ran afoul of Ethan, bringing them into combat again in what is easily their most evenly matched and coolest fight in the series, in my opinion. When Ethan beats Bronn here, it feels like he is beating him for real, even if Bronn does end up escaping. And honestly, Bronn is never the physical threat to Ethan that he is right here again, further cementing the feeling that Ethan is his superior in combat. This issue ends so many plotlines for Scion. Issue 26, then, isn't really the beginning of a new story arc, but more of a transitioning point between them. We're moving away from the threat of Bronn in this issue, and the threat of war between the two nations is over. The threat here is whatever threatens the lesser races, and the challenge of reaching the new Sanctuary Isle. And looking at the next few issues of Scion, you would think that Marz's focus would be on fleshing out the Sanctuary Isle, maybe introduce some new lesser races cast members, showcase some of the new problems on the island, and challenge Ethan and Ashley's leadership qualities in a non-combat fashion. And we do start to see those ideas. Issue 27 introduces the housing issue that they face, and it sees Ethan attacked by a lesser race's assassin, someone who was unwilling to listen to a human, despite those humans being instrumental in gaining their freedom. That is some smart storytelling. That's awesome. I really love that setup. I even love Exeter killing the assassin, but hiding it, because revealing that he did that would be a huge emotional twist to his relationship with Ethan. But Marz then turns the story sideways, moving us into the plotline of Mai Shen pretending to be Dane and Ethan needing to be involved in that story, and then we do the journey to Tigris, which stems from an interesting place in the defense of the Sanctuary Isle, but ultimately it just distracts us from the interesting problems that the island presents. Now, I'll fully admit that I do not know when Marz and Cheung knew that they would be leaving Scion. It was pretty clear after issue 26 that Cheung couldn't keep up with a monthly release schedule anymore. Between issues 26 and 39, Cheung only drew 6 issues, so less than half. I know that after he left Scion, Cheung was assigned to draw one of CrossGen's imprint titles, Brian Pulido's Medieval Lady Death, the Wild Hunt miniseries, which was actually never even fully published. That's not the important part. The important part of what I'm saying is that Cheung didn't stop working for CrossGen. He just moved on to something else that hopefully CrossGen could finish and then release. Marz, on the other hand, was also writing 2 other books, the high fantasy Sojourn and the dark samurai tale called The Path. so leaving Scion at that point didn't necessarily mean either of them leaving CrossGen. But knowing that they were continuing to work at CrossGen, and given the special nature of issue 39, we can guess that Marz and Cheung must have known at least 3 issues ahead of issue 39 being published. That's how early a book needs to be solicited to comic book stores so that they know what to order. So, in theory, Marz and Cheung were working on issue 36 when they decided that issue 39 would be their final issue, and 36 is kind of where our pacing gets weird. Up to this point, Marz has generally built his stories up in 6 to 7 issue arcs, culminating in the final issue of the arc, and then exploring a new idea in the next story. If we look at 26 through 33 or 34, the odd arc of finding a way to defend the Sanctuary Isle and introduce Tigris as a background threat, then issues 34 or 35 would have kicked off our next arc, one in which Elena is married to Braun, King Dane is missing, and Kai and Ethan have to do something about those things. Following Marz's normal writing style, that arc would then have ended around issues 44 or 45, and then we would have moved into the next arc. But Marz isn't going to be writing Scion until issues 44 or 45. He is only writing until issue 39, so he needs to finish telling whatever stories he wants to tell, tee up the incoming author, and then end Scion on a semi-satisfactory note. So instead of exploring the new status quo of Braun and Elena as reluctant Raven power couple for an arc, Marz has Court, Kai, and Ethan defeat Braun in a single issue, with barely any conflict to it at all. And let's say that freeing Elena and finding King Dane were always planned to be resolved in the same arc, like a 2-for-1 kind of deal on Heron royalty. We would then spend several issues in the Raven countryside, watching the siblings work through their issues before they find King Dane. Skink traveling with Ethan to the wedding makes more sense if he is also going to be traveling the countryside with Ethan, and maybe his own mysterious powers could have helped them find Dane. The rather lackluster story of issue 37 and the lack of stakes to issue 38 make more sense when you consider that Marz is trying to wrap up his stories before he has to leave the book. Closing out those plots also leaves Marz with plenty of time in issue 39 to write one last love letter to Scion. We see the return to themes about the horrors of war, the cost of misjudging someone, and the responsibility to help others. And Marz does it while still teeing up the war with Tigris, which is what our incoming author, Ian Eddington, is really going to be focusing on. Looking at these final 3 issues from Marz, their half-baked and unfinished-feeling stories are much more palatable, knowing that Marz is trying to get as much story as he can in there before he is gone forever, and those story elements are no longer his to play with. Even his final closing bit of writing says that other storytellers will be picking up the reins of Scion's narrative, and that's okay. So he closes out what he can, and he hints at where he thinks Scion's story will ultimately take us in his vision, with Ethan as a king, as a father, and as a husband, as a peacemaker, indicated by the fact that Nadia now stands beside him. Whatever conflicts the new author puts Ethan through, this is where Marz sees Ethan going. He and Cheung are wishing Ethan a prosperous future, and then they're handing him off to a new creative team. We do have a small letter once the story has finished from Marz to the reading audience. He and Cheung built the world of Avalon together, and even he notes that it particularly sung under the pencil of Jim Cheung. This is not a dig at the other artists who drew Scion, it's praise that Jim Cheung just did it the best. For both of them, leaving Scion to another creative team is like handing them their child. They just have to hope that the new parents don't screw it up. He does make a point of thanking everyone that they have worked with on the book, including former inker Don Hillsman II, former colorists Cesar Rodriguez, Justin Ponser, and Jason Keith, as well as the letterers Dave Lanphier and Troy Petiri. He then introduces the incoming creative team, the author that I mentioned earlier, Ian Eddington, as well as new penciler Luke Ross, and how excited he is to see what they do. We're then provided with a single panel drawn by Cheung, of Ethan and Braun squaring off in the tournament arena again. But this time they're dressed in medieval armor, looking a tad bit more informed by history than the fantasy designs Cheung used at the beginning of Scion. It's a very nice artistic bookend to start this journey with these two characters staring each other down across tournament sand, and ending with them doing the same. While Scion is far from a perfect comic, and I have certainly had my share of complaints about it, I do think that Marz and Cheung's time on the title is something special. Marz's writing often hid subtle and complex character motivations behind a veneer of petulance or just simplicity. His characters always had more depth than we were told, and his writing of Braun is easily a highlight in this series. As Marz says in his goodbye letter, Jim Cheung came onto this book as one of the best pencilers in the industry, and now he leaves as one of the best of all time. Paired with some of the best inking and the best coloring that I've ever seen, Scion is a beautiful comic filled with fast-paced action scenes, heartbreaking emotional beats, and just a finish like no other. I love Scion for reasons that are completely different for why I love books like Meridian or The Path or Route 666, but ultimately at the end of the day, I still love Scion the most, and that is no more true than it is right now, having finished reading Marz and Cheung's run. But Scion isn't over yet. Next time, our new creative team picks up their pens and pencils and launches us right into war. Tigris has been prowling around the background, just waiting for Marz to finish his Heron family adventures and leave us with an opening. And now is that time. You would think that two nations that have been enemies for centuries would kind of be ready to fight a war, but they have never fought an enemy like Tigris, or its people. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 18.23 of Scion. They don't bleed. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.